In a world reshaped by disruption and driven by innovation, one summit has stood at the forefront of transformation: the Times Group ET Now Global Business Summit. Since 2015, this prestigious platform has brought together the brightest minds, visionary leaders, policymakers, and global pioneers to chart the course of business and society. With India's Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi as a guiding force, GBS has ignited bold conversations, unveiling groundbreaking strategies that drive progress and prosperity. As GBS 2025 takes center stage under the theme Evolve, Emerge, Expand, the world's foremost thought leaders explore the seismic shifts shaping the global economy and shed light on how can nations adapt. How can businesses thrive? How do we expand possibilities in an interconnected world? This is where the future is reimagined. In this episode, Devansh Jain, Executive Director, Inoxgfl Group, and Vivek Anand Oberoi, partner in Nisus Finance UAE, engaged in a thought-provoking fireside chat with Vikram Oza, Consulting Editor, ET Now. They opined their views on the topic of Built to Last, designed to disrupt the future of entrepreneurship.
I was just telling you about the topic of discussion and how relevant it is, because entrepreneurship, as we know it, is going through a paradigm shift. There is a lot of balancing to do in today's context because, yes, you have to be profitable, but you have to be sustainable as well. You have to be disruptive, but you have to ensure that disruption doesn't come at the cost of, well, there's social impact always at the heart of a lot of businesses, and we're seeing more of that come through. So when you talk about all these differing or maybe opposites, how do you balance it, is something that I wanted to discuss with Devansh Jain and Vivek Oberoi. Vivek, of course, has been disruptive in his own career by switching from entertainment as a profession to entertainment as a hobby. But how do you do that? How do you do that, Vivek, when you diversify as much as you have? Because I'm seeing the spread. It's finance, it's real estate, and it doesn't stop there.
I think the journey from being an actor in front of the camera to being a director or managing director in the boardroom is quite an interesting one. It does bring in a lot more responsibility. I had to probably study and learn and equip myself with knowledge and information more than I studied when I was in school or college, with a focus to being an actor. But that did pay results. I think what's interesting, the predominant difference is anything that you want to scale. How do you scale beyond a point? I was lucky enough to have the leverage of, celebrity, being able to create more reach. But I found that the variables in my industry, whether you want to scale it economically, whether you want to scale it in terms of volume or content, it's still very limiting. I mean, it's very difficult to mitigate the variables that are there. And that's the reason I chose real estate. I felt that real estate was a strong space where I could, on the one hand with B&W Developments, scale the luxury real estate portfolio, which we're doing in the UAE, which by the grace of God, we're at almost $7 billion US now across 22 projects that we're doing there.
So there are a lot of synergies that you build into the diversification that you do when you try and pull it all together. When it comes to you, Devansh, because I know your great-grandfather started in newsprint trade. From there to come into fluorochemicals and then to come into renewables, through your father and now you, that is a long stretch as well. And then to kind of see how you can synergize your operations towards a push for the future, because obviously you are scouting for possibilities of growth in the future. How do you actually decide that that's the direction to take when there is so much happening in every sphere?
Look, to be honest, Vikram, there is some method to this madness, When Dad started the fluoropolymer business, and as they say, you've got to be agile and nimble-footed, right? And disruption is the name of the game. But effectively, he started with refrigerant gases. And there was the Montreal Protocol and the Kyoto Protocol, which eventually led to sunset of refrigerant gases. So we thrive in disruption. And Dad forward integrated into fluoropolymers. Yeah. So when you go into fluoropolymers, it elongates the entire life cycle for refrigerants because there is no greenhouse gas emission. Now, when we were in fluoropolymers, that's also the time when I was studying at Carnegie Mellon. I was getting done with my degree. And as I say, business is in the blood. I was always hearing business, breakfast, lunch, dinner, whenever it was. You just wanted to come back. So I did a dual degree and I came back in 3 years because I wanted to work.
Yeah.
And when I came back, we had these large cash flows. And we were looking at a diversification opportunity. Fortunately for us at that point in time, we also had the world's first UNFCCC registered CDM project, carbon credits.
Right.
So, we started seeing that, there is money in greening the world. And I'm talking about 15 years ago, when renewables energy transition weren't as sexy as they are today.
Correct.
So at that point in time, we worked with McKinsey and a lot of these other guys to figure out where do we go. And I thought that wind is going to be the future. Of course, solar eventually now with disruption. So that's how we went about building the wind business. There were a lot of pitfalls, challenges, whatever we heard from McKinsey. They probably give the same strategy paper to 20 people. But you got to learn those and then navigate those challenges and create a model where you succeed.
Correct.
When we listed wind in 15, in fact, I was just talking to Nikunj outside. It was the largest IPO in India in about 2.5 years. And at that point in time, 1,000 crore IPO was huge. Today, 10,000 may be the norm. But effectively, that's how we went about building businesses. I think when it came to disruption and capturing value, it's no secret today, the two biggest investment themes globally are digital and energy transition. True. And what we are trying to do at Inoxgfl is be at the forefront of energy transition. So we've gone from EVs to batteries, to wind, and now a large foray into solar, and a large IPP which we're building out. Having said that, across EV and batteries, the heart of the batteries and EVs are fluorine, which is what Gujarat Fluoro did. So there is method to the madness. It's not as if we went from steel to cement to finance, right? And I think in renewables, we are now capturing the entire RTC, hybrid, and FDR play, where every time we sell a turbine, everyone wants a solar piece to it. So we say, why don't we just get into solar as well? So there is complementarity to the business we're doing.
Right.
And we control a large part of the grid, 15 gigawatts.
Right.
So when we control grid, you can load wind and solar on the same grid under hybrid and RTC. So that's how we're going about building these ventures.
So it evolves gradually, this entire thought process. It's not disruption for the sake of disruption. You obviously spot an opportunity, but you build as you go along.
I think the key differentiator is, in both cases, has been that earlier the focus in any kind of business was just forward integration and backward integration. But now it's lateral ecosystem building. You build a whole ecosystem, and that kind of helps amplify growth exponentially.
So disruption is in building an ecosystem and to build that architecture before you get into it. How easy is it to do that, especially when you're looking for finance? Do you look at internal accruals, or do you go out and decide that, look, I need to sell this disruption idea?
Raising capital or finance could be easy or difficult. And the way I say it is, if you've created value across the group or in businesses which you've been, it becomes that much easier. And if you've been through hell, and I tell you, Inox Wind was literally bankrupt when 30 players went bust. At that point in time, going and raising even 100 crores was a pain. And I'm not talking about the group, I'm just talking about the renewable arm. Today, we've created such massive wealth across wind, green, EV, that for us, we've, given where the markets are today, we've in fact just closed about 3,000 crores in the past 30 days, and at a pre-rev level in one of our EV ventures. I think what's important for many other businesses, it has to be a balance of valuation and internal accruals. Right. Look, if you're really going to go out and build something big, and if you're just going to keep waiting for internal accruals, it's going to take too long.
Right.
But if you can create value or show a moat which is disruptive, a lot of stuff which Vivek is doing, or possibly what we're doing in our IPP company now, the valuations are so large, and people trust you because you've created value.
Yes.
That you can raise large amounts of capital to build out these businesses. That's how we are building our businesses.
Vivek, when you were looking at scaling, you were looking at the possibilities within the entire ecosystem that you were trying to create, what exactly were you gunning for? What was the overriding theme that you had in mind that this is where I need to be?
Vikram, it depends on the business. I'm involved across a spectrum of businesses, but when I'm looking at real estate, it's all fine to later say, oh, we thought of it well in advance. But some of it is on the fly, like when you're an actor and you're improvising in the middle of a scene, you have to improvise as you see opportunities coming along.
You are competing on a global scale. How do you stay ahead of the curve? Because you need your own domestic regulatory framework to support your disruptive idea. It may not immediately, but maybe it will in the future. How do you do that?
Look, a couple of things, right? I think, at least for us, we have integrated operations. And that's how we become leaders in the sectors in which we operate. So for example, in fluoropolymers, we're the world's second largest fluoropolymer producer because we have very, very integrated operations. If you're really going to compete on a global scale, you got to stop cribbing about China, 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 right? At some point in time, there will be subsidies. At some point in time, there will be protection. But at some point in time, there will not be subsidies and protection. And at that point in time, the only thing which helps is your cost structure, number one, your efficiency in operations, and two, I think, constantly innovating to develop the best products. And I think that's what we've done. Of course, some of our businesses are domestic plays, and some of them are global plays. But at least on the battery and the chemical side, we are constantly disrupting in terms of the products which we're making, the advanced fluoropolymers and chemicals. But I think
technology is helping.
Absolutely. I think you've got to be very integrated operations, cost structures, and having financial backing. I think those are the three buzzwords I would use to stay ahead of the curve. Of course, technology is absolutely important because you're outdated, you're not going to really compete on any product.
That's the only thing I would add. I mean, technology, whether like how we're now integrating AI to bring in predictive analytics, we're integrating blockchain to potentially explore tokenization with real-world assets, fractional ownership, but through a coin with actual underlying utility. So those kind of new directions is where we think the real value capturing would be, and you could build your bastion.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
We're on the sidelines of the Global Business Summit 2025, and I'm in conversation with the Executive Director of Inoxgfl Group, Devansh Jain. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you, Pooja. It's a pleasure to be here.
So for sake of some context setting, when we talk about tech innovation systems in this country, what comes to mind? How might you characterize them in their current state?
Look, to be honest, at this point in time, the two buzzwords globally are energy transition and tech. And I think they're both combining together. When you look at the newspapers these days, it's all talk about data centers, AI, and effectively renewable energy. And we're moving very fast on terms of solar, battery energy storage systems. So I think India is right at the forefront of both these two things. And I think we're in a sweet spot.
Now, when we talk about the business case, behind renewable energy, how can we further incentivize businesses to essentially pursue R&D at the fervor it needs to be, and essentially implementation as well? How do we accelerate that movement such that it transcends well beyond awareness to acting?
Look, two or three things. First and foremost, I think India is doing a lot, and I think we're right at the forefront of renewables, as I mentioned. Having said that, I don't think we need any subsidy to mainstream renewable energy. Battery energy storage systems is different because today renewables is most competitive. It's cheaper than fossil fuel-based power. I think the two or three things which we need to do as a nation is probably make PLI more deeper. You've got PLI on the front end. For example, you have PLI on battery, or you had PLI in the beginning with respect to modules. You've got to get the entire supply chain covered. Because effectively, if you just have the front end and the back end is still going to get imported from our neighboring countries, you're not really going to become Atmanirbhar in the true sense. Right. Second, I think we've got a great startup culture now evolving. I would say post-COVID, I think we've got a great startup culture, but we could potentially further incentivize that by giving tax breaks. R&D in pharma gets huge tax breaks. Sure. But I think with respect to R&D in other sectors, I don't think there's enough incentive. So, contrary to what a lot of people keep saying that we need subsidies from the government and we need this and that, I think it's more about making PLI deeper. And I think it's about giving more incentives to startups and deeper R&D tax breaks. I think these two things could really propel the nation forward.
Well, you've outlined some of the policy frameworks that you'd like to see with respect to the maturing of local manufacturing ecosystems. What more would you like to see from the private sector? Or how can the public sector and the private sector perhaps better work in tandem in that context?
You've got a lot of private sector companies doing a lot of stuff. You've got the Tata Research Labs, you've got Reliance doing some stuff. in our group at Inoxgfl, we're doing a lot of stuff where we're working with startups on new technologies in battery and storage.
Right.
But we need the government to be more proactive in doling out capital to these startups. And I think just talking about public-private partnerships, to really get that going, no one's going to put $1 billion, the way we're in a democracy.
Right.
But if you get these startup grants of $200,000, $1 million, $500,000, I think you can do a lot more.
Now, when we talk about a $10 trillion economy, sir, to what extent is clean energy, renewable energy going to be a make or break line item?
Look, I think it's an interesting question. I think energy transition today is at the forefront of virtually everything we're discussing. Whichever global conference you talk about, whichever trip our Honorable Prime Minister is on, the fundamental discussions are around energy transition.
You're right.
Now, effectively, for any corporate to really scale up and be at the forefront of disruption, everyone needs to move towards the net zero goals. Whether it's investors, if you're not moving towards SDG loans or SDG goals or towards net zero, these guys are going to pull back from investments. If you look at some of the larger power guzzling sectors, be it steel or cement, they all need to move towards, for example, green steel, green cement. I mean, domestically for sure, because renewables today is the cheapest source of power. But even from an export perspective, you've got cross-border carbon taxes kicking in. Europe's done that. A lot of other places in the world will do that. So effectively, the cornerstone of this 10 trillion economy is, to a great extent, is going to be investments in energy transition. And it's also going to include mobility to a great extent. You're seeing these phenomenal targets globally on energy, EVs. We've got Elon Musk today leading most of the negotiations for the US. Right. But from an India perspective as well, we've got a very ambitious target of 30% by 2030. Now, whether we achieve 25 or 30, we've got a phenomenal target. People are moving towards it. But to my mind, the cornerstone of the 10 trillion economy is going to be investments in energy transition. Naturally, that's also going to lead to a lot of job creation. It's going to lead to a lot of skilling, because as more and more AI gets into the world, it's not really going to lead to redundancy in jobs. I think it's going to be upskilling. If you're not going to move up the curve, and if you're just going to keep doing basic stuff, then you've got DeepSeek, you've got ChatGPT doing that stuff. So that's how I look at things.
You're absolutely right. I have to agree there. And I really want to hone in on a point you made about the commitment to clean energy no longer being a nice to have. It is a non-negotiable.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right? So let's talk more about the role that you anticipate Inoxgfl will play as we become an energy independent country.
Look, at Inoxgfl, we're positioning ourselves at the forefront of energy transition. We're across the entire ecosystem. So we're across energy storage, we're across electric vehicles, we're in wind turbines. We've recently announced our foray into solar modules and cells. We're in green services. In fact, our O&M company is the world's first listed green services company. And we're now in power generation. So we're trying to do our bit, to make this a better place for future generations. Of course, it's very profitable.
More self-sufficient.
Absolutely. We are very profitable to that extent. But having said that, I think we're trying to change the world, making India more clean and green. And I think, and each of these businesses which we are playing out or which we're building out are large scale. So for example, wind turbines, we're the largest turnkey solutions provider in the country. In our battery storage and electric vehicle business, we're setting up the largest battery chemical complex in the world outside of China. So these aren't just small businesses or small concepts just because it's sexy to talk about energy transition, but we're really going and building leadership positions. And I think only if you're leaders in any of these sectors, you're going to be able to disrupt it, or you're going to be able to bring down costs. And I think that's really what India needs, low costs and disruption. And I think we are really trying to do our bit across these, each of these verticals.
Mm-hmm. Well, Inoxgfl is not just talking the talk, they're certainly walking the walk. Let's hone in finally on batteries. All right, because I think the groundbreaking work that the company has done there is certainly capturing attention globally. Tell us more about what's in store as far as the future, perhaps a sneak preview.
At Inoxgfl, yeah. In an electric vehicle, 40% of the cost of the vehicle is a battery.
Is that right?
And the parts which we make
yes.
are virtually 40% of the battery cost. So in effect, at Inoxgfl, across the product basket which we are in, we effectively control 15% of an electric vehicle supply chain, which is the single largest part.
It's staggering.
So, we're not the front-end battery maker, we're not the front-end OEM, but we're really the heart of the battery. And I think the heart of most of these chemicals is fluorine, which our company Gujarat Fluoro is the largest fluorine producer in India. So I think we've been working at it silently for the past 4 or 5 years. It's now really come to the fore because of a lot of the capital raise which we've done and one of the tie-ups which we've had with one of the global guys. I think it's been in the media for reasons unknown to us. But I think we're doing some cutting-edge stuff there. We've cut down costs drastically. They're very integrated operations. And I think as we move forward, we're really looking at capturing a big share of the global market, certainly a large chunk of the Indian market, but frankly speaking, I think a big chunk of the global market. And that's truly an area where you're really going to see China plus one playing out, thanks to a lot of the global regulations, IRA or Trump's tariffs and so on and so forth. And I think India and Inoxgfl are in a very sweet spot. So we're doing our bit to really capture a big chunk of that pie.
Thank you for taking the time to speak with us, and we wish you and the larger Inoxgfl team all the continued success.
Thank you so much, Pooja. It was a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you.